What started as a routine appearance on a late-night talk show quickly turned into a firestorm no one saw coming. When Karoline Leavitt stepped onto Stephen Colbert's stage, few expected the sharp exchange, the emotional intensity, and the dramatic confrontation that would unfold before millions. But within minutes, the tension between them ignited like dry tinder, and Colbert crossed a line that left everyone breathless. The accusation? Shocking. The response? Unforgettable. This is not just a clash of ideologies. It is a war of words, live on national television, where reputations are built or destroyed in a single sentence. What did Stephen Colbert say that pushed Karoline Leavitt to her limit? How did she manage to turn the tables in front of a stunned audience? And what happened afterward that left even his most loyal viewers questioning everything? Buckle up. This is a confrontation that shattered expectations, flipped the narrative, and revealed more than either side bargained for. Make sure to like and subscribe so you never miss the full story when the truth cuts deeper than the punchlines. The studio lights beamed across the set of The Late Show, casting a warm glow on the polished desk where Stephen Colbert adjusted his suit jacket and glanced at the cue cards. The energy backstage buzzed with anticipation. Karoline Leavitt, former White House staffer turned rising political firebrand, had agreed to a rare live interview with the late-night host. It was expected to be spirited, even tense, but no one imagined the collision course ahead. Levit stepped into view wearing a calm, confident smile. Applause erupted from the audience, some genuine, some coaxed by the stage manager's gestures. But she wasn't fazed. She had weathered worse. What she did not expect was that Colbert, known for his biting wit, would go far beyond comedy tonight. After a few opening niceties, the atmosphere shifted. The conversation took a sudden turn as Colbert leaned in and, with a rehearsed smirk, dropped the first verbal grenade. "You know, Karoline, people like you are exactly why many Americans feel race relations have gone backward," he said, folding his hands as if delivering a calm observation. The audience stirred, unsure whether to laugh or recoil. Karoline blinked. The words hung in the air like smoke from a just-lit fire. What did he mean, people like you? Was this his idea of satire, or something far more personal? She leaned slightly forward, her posture unchanged but her eyes sharper now. "Excuse me?" she asked, her tone even. Colbert doubled down. "You downplay systemic issues, mock protests, and weaponize outrage. You sell division disguised as patriotism. That is the new racism, whether you call it that or not." The words stunned not only Levit but many in the audience. A few claps scattered across the room, but they were quickly drowned out by silence. Had he just accused her, on national television, of fueling racism? Was this an interrogation disguised as an interview? And what prompted such a loaded claim? Karoline took a breath. Her face betrayed no anger, only the measured control of someone calculating her next move. The camera cut to a close-up. Viewers at home leaned forward, sensing the shift. Something was about to break. The question loomed heavy. Was Colbert trying to provoke her? Or was this an ambush designed to corner her in front of millions? Why now? Why her? And why go so far? She could have laughed it off, deflected, or walked off the stage. But Karoline Leavitt was not going to retreat. Not here. Not tonight. As she prepared to respond, her voice low and firm, the tension in the room became electric. What would she say? Would she retaliate or rise above? And if she pushed back, would the audience rally behind her or turn against her? The entire studio seemed to brace itself. Because when a moment this volatile erupts on live TV, there is no script to return to, only instinct. And Karoline Leavitt's instincts had been forged in the fires of public scrutiny. What followed next would define the night. The silence that followed Stephen Colbert's accusation was more piercing than any shout. Karoline Leavitt sat poised, unflinching, as if the words had ricocheted off armor she had worn before. Her fingers curled slightly on the arm of the chair, and the cameras, sensing blood in the water, zoomed in closer. Millions of viewers were now hanging on the edge of anticipation. Would she strike back? She didn't blink. Instead, she smiled. "I appreciate your honesty, Stephen," she began, her voice low but deliberate. "But let me correct something. The real division isn't created by people like me. It's exposed by people like you. You get to sit behind a desk and mock middle America. You get to tell working-class families that their frustrations are invalid because they don't sound like you, vote like you, or live in your neighborhoods." Colbert tried to interrupt, but she raised a finger, subtle, not rude, just enough to reclaim the floor. "You think patriotism is a punchline. You think calling out woke extremism is the same as racism. That's the real problem. You don't debate ideas anymore. You smear them." The audience shifted again, this time less sure. A few scattered murmurs moved like static across the crowd. Even Colbert, who had leaned back in his chair smugly minutes ago, now leaned forward with narrowed eyes. Karoline wasn't done. "You accuse me of selling division? I have walked through communities that your show jokes about. I have listened to parents whose kids are trapped in broken schools, while your network cheers on policies that only benefit the elite. You think it's brave to sit here and label me a racist because it makes your audience clap. But bravery looks a lot different when you're not insulated by applause." Her tone wasn't loud, but it was cutting, controlled, forceful. The kind of clarity that doesn't yell because it doesn't need to. Colbert cleared his throat, reaching for a new tactic. "Well, if you're so concerned about America, Karoline, maybe you should talk less about cancel culture and more about actual inequality." The crowd stirred again. But this time, Karoline didn't wait. "Actual inequality?" she snapped. "You mean like the record crime in cities where your favored policies are failing? Or the censorship of views that don't align with your Hollywood narrative? You want to talk inequality, Stephen? Let's talk about working mothers losing their jobs over vaccine mandates. Let's talk about small business owners crushed by lockdowns you cheered from your mansion." Now the audience was truly rattled. Some gasped, others clapped. A few booed. The live studio atmosphere had transformed from polite entertainment to something far more dangerous, unfiltered discourse. Colbert, rattled but trying to keep control, smiled again. "So what you're saying is, you're the victim?" She stared at him. "I'm saying truth doesn't need permission from a laugh track." The air tightened again. The host looked down at his notes, grasping for footing, while Karoline turned toward the audience. "Ask yourself this," she said, her gaze cutting through the studio. "If the only people allowed to speak are the ones who agree with this man, what does that say about the state of free speech in America?" For the first time that night, it wasn't Colbert directing the show. It was her. And though the cameras kept rolling, and the teleprompters waited to shift the tone, neither of them knew what was coming next. Because Karoline Leavitt had just redefined the rules of engagement, and she wasn't finished. The tension in the studio was no longer just awkward. It was electric. Karoline Leavitt had not only survived Stephen Colbert's opening ambush, she had turned it inside out, making him look like a host who had underestimated his guest and lost control of his own narrative. But now, the fallout began. Social media lit up within minutes. Clips of the exchange were already making the rounds, spliced with captions like, "Karoline destroys Colbert," "Talk show takeover," and "Truth bomb on live TV." The algorithm fed the fire. Millions of eyes that hadn't even tuned in were now glued to the confrontation that was rapidly becoming the most viral segment of the month. Inside the studio, Colbert attempted to wrest back control. "Well, Karoline, we do appreciate strong opinions here, but I just want to say there's a difference between fighting for something and blaming everything on the other side." She smiled again, tilting her head ever so slightly. "Is that How you see it? That I'm just blaming others? Maybe the difference between us, Stephen, is that you view accountability as blame. I call it honesty. A few audience members clapped, hesitantly at first, then louder. It was subtle, but unmistakable. The crowd, once clearly in Colbert's corner, was starting to fracture. His smug certainty was cracking. And for the first time, the tension wasn't just between two people, it was rippling through every seat in the studio. Karoline leaned forward. You want to talk about opinions? Let's talk about yours. You said in your monologue last week that people like me are stoking fear, that calling out censorship, crime, and government overreach is somehow dangerous. But what's more dangerous, Stephen? Calling it out, or pretending it's not happening at all? Colbert smiled tightly. We just try to make people laugh, Karoline. And I try to give them the truth, she shot back. Even when it's uncomfortable. He adjusted his tie. Well, not everyone agrees with your version of the truth. Good, she said. That's what freedom looks like. But disagreement doesn't justify silencing. And that's what people like you have been doing, turning disagreement into disqualification. The audience's applause now returned with more confidence. Colbert's usual grip on the room was slipping. This wasn't a comedy show anymore. It was a debate, and he was losing. Then Karoline did something unexpected. She turned to the audience. I'm not here to convince Stephen, she said, gesturing calmly. He's made up his mind about people like me a long time ago. But maybe you haven't. Maybe you're tired of being told how to think, who to mock, and what side of the line you have to stand on. Her voice softened, but the gravity remained. I grew up watching shows like this. They were supposed to challenge power, not protect it. Somewhere along the way, comedy stopped punching up and started punching down. At everyday Americans, at faith, at values, at people who just want to be heard. A hush fell again. Even Colbert didn't interrupt this time. And if that makes me dangerous to this show, she said, locking eyes with the host, then maybe this show needs to ask itself why it's so afraid of the people it claims to entertain. Silence. Then a single clap. Then more. It wasn't a standing ovation, but it was genuine. And that made it worse for Colbert, because it meant something had shifted. And not just in that studio. The control he once wielded effortlessly was cracking under the weight of a moment he hadn't planned for. A guest who wasn't playing along. A narrative he couldn't wrap in sarcasm. And as the next segment break loomed, the producers were already scrambling. Whispers filled the headset lines. What do we do now? Because Karoline Leavitt had just turned a guest appearance into a movement. And there were still 3 minutes left on the clock. The moment the cameras cut to commercial, it was as if the entire studio exhaled all at once. The lights dimmed slightly, and production staff burst into motion like a pit crew at a racetrack. Stephen Colbert leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, trying to mask the tension that now visibly clung to him like a fog. Karoline Leavitt, on the other hand, remained composed. She reached for her water without a trace of tremble in her hand. It was not just an awkward moment. It was a clear disruption of the show's usual rhythm. For years, Colbert had shaped the tone and tempo of his interviews, reducing even powerful political figures to defensive jabs or nervous chuckles. But this time, the script had flipped. Karoline had come in prepared not just to speak, but to shift the stage itself. Behind the scenes, producers huddled in a panic. Should they cut the segment short? Bring in another guest? Find a way to make the rest of the episode light-hearted enough to dilute the viral wave already sweeping the internet? But there was a problem. Too many people were watching now. The confrontation had become a lightning rod. Turning away from it would only make the show look worse. They had to ride the storm they had accidentally summoned. Colbert's producer leaned into his ear and whispered, "You need to take the reins back right now." He nodded, half listening, then forced a smile as the red light blinked back on. "Welcome back," he said, his voice tight. "We are still here with Karoline Leavitt, who certainly knows how to make an entrance." She gave a short laugh. "I'd say the conversation is overdue, wouldn't you?" Colbert raised an eyebrow, but his usual charm was now edged with uncertainty. He leaned forward. "Karoline, you've talked a lot about honesty, about accountability. Let me ask you, directly, do you believe your words help bring people together, or do they just provoke more anger?" A murmur ran through the crowd. It was a question meant to frame her as divisive, but Levit didn't hesitate. "If people are angry," she said, "it's not because I'm dividing them. It's because they've been ignored for too long. I'm not here to smooth over the cracks with nice words. I'm here to pull back the curtain." Colbert tried to interrupt, but she kept going. "And here's the truth you never say on this show, Stephen. Mockery is not the same as bravery. You make jokes, and they're funny, sure, but it's always at the expense of those who don't have the platform to respond. Tonight, someone finally gets to respond." That landed like a hammer. The audience was dead silent. Colbert looked to his notes, clearly unsettled. "We don't silence people here." "No?" she asked, tone steady. "Then why is it that every time someone pushes back on the progressive narrative, they're branded extreme, dangerous, or worse?" He paused. She continued, "Because it's easy to laugh when you are insulated from the consequences. But there are Americans out there, parents, workers, veterans, who are living through policies you only joke about. They are not laughing, and they're certainly not being heard on shows like this." That was when the tide truly turned. The crowd, once skeptical, now seemed fully aware that something real was happening. A confrontation that wasn't staged, a voice that wasn't pre-approved, and most shockingly of all, a response that wasn't being cut off. The producers didn't dare cut away, because the ratings were soaring in real time. Online chatter had spiked. Hashtags like Levit vs. Colbert and Truth on TV were already trending. The audience had stopped consuming entertainment and started participating in a cultural reckoning, and as Karoline sat forward again, preparing for one final salvo, she looked directly into the camera, not at Colbert. "You can keep mocking us," she said, "but don't be surprised when we stop laughing and start showing up." The room was still. Colbert leaned back, his script now meaningless. There was nothing left to do but wait and see how it ended. As the lights beamed hotter and the air in the studio thickened with the weight of an unplanned reckoning, something shifted, not just in the audience, but in the very fabric of the broadcast. Karoline Leavitt had not only shattered the show's rhythm, she had exposed something far deeper: the fragility of a cultural narrative that had for too long relied on controlled laughter and pre-approved outrage. Stephen Colbert, once the king of the clever jab, sat still for a beat too long. His cue cards now looked like crutches, his wit dulled by the sheer force of an unyielding guest who had taken the seat across from him not to be playful, not to be polite, but to tell the truth. "All right," he finally said, exhaling with forced ease. "Let's take a step back. Clearly this is different from most of our interviews." Karoline's smile was slight but unshaken. "Maybe that's the problem." He chuckled, but there was no laugh track to bail him out. The audience wasn't giving him the safety net he had grown used to. They were watching, truly watching, not to be entertained, but to understand who really had something to say. Colbert turned defensive. "So what do you want from shows like this, Karoline? What's the demand? That we stop making jokes? Stop criticizing? Stop asking questions?" "No," she replied calmly. "Ask questions. That's what real dialogue needs. But ask everyone, not just the people you already agree with. Stop stacking the deck and then pretending you're surprised when the house wins." A thunderclap of applause broke through, louder now, not awkward, not forced. The crowd was fully with her. Colbert's facade broke for just a second. It was brief, a blink, a shift in the eyes, but it said everything. He knew this interview would be rewatched, dissected, and remembered not for the laughs, but for the fallout. The final seconds of the segment ticked away. There was no witty closing monologue, no string of snarky lines to button up the conversation. There was only Karoline Leavitt, unmoved and unafraid, seated in a chair that had been meant to contain her, but had instead become a stage for her rise. The credits began to roll. The band awkwardly struck up a tune, but even they seemed hesitant. As the cameras panned out, Karoline turned to Stephen one last time. "You invited me on this show," she said quietly but firmly. "You asked a question. I answered. And now millions of Americans finally feel like someone spoke for them. No mic drop. No dramatic exit." She simply stood, nodded to the audience, and walked off the stage. Colbert remained seated. For a man who had made a career out of satire and spectacle, he had just been part of a moment that was neither. It was raw, it was real, and most damning of all, it wasn't his. As Karoline stepped into the hallway backstage, her phone already buzzing with messages, clips, and news alerts, she understood what had just happened. She hadn't merely confronted a late-night host. She had hijacked the broadcast. She had redirected the cultural conversation. And while her critics would call it disrespectful, confrontational, even dangerous, none of them could ignore it. Because it was everywhere. The mainstream had been pierced. The veneer cracked, and as Karoline Leavitt walked away from the stage, she didn't look back. Not because she was dismissing it, but because she had no reason to. Her message had landed, and now it echoed far beyond the walls of that studio.